Naruto exclusive videos lemon come out on my Boosty. You can watch and subscribe. Link in the description. Enjoy watching. Description: a boy to survive in the shinobi world, and even harder for a girl. Naruto Uzumaki has never been as resilient as her male reflection from the canon, and therefore, under the pressure of hatred and indifference, the girl withdraws into herself and tries to escape from reality through books, which have become her only friends and training. Part 8. Plan. The plan was as simple as it was effective. It took some distraction, of course, but Naruto hadn't just been sitting there with books and manuals for as long as she could. It hadn't been hard for her to block his view for a few measly seconds. Of course, if their enemy hadn't been unable to leave his spot, she wouldn't have succeeded. But he had a technique that didn't allow him to move, so a couple of simple clones and a few seal explosions, if used correctly, allowed them to carry out what she could proudly call her first real plan. She had never set herself the goal of wounding or killing the enemy; she would never have succeeded. No, Naruto only needed him to lose his vigilance for a second or move from his place. The latter was preferable, of course. As expected, dodging one or two Fuma shurikens was not difficult for such an experienced ninja as the demon of the blood mist, but they did not count on that. They were counting on what would happen later. The sudden transformation of the second shuriken back into Naruto was quite unexpected and seemed to miraculously make the enemy lose his guard, which Naruto took advantage of. 5 sharpened kunai flew towards the enemy, prudently aimed at different parts of his body. Expectedly, the water prison was destroyed by Zabuza himself, who did not want to get a couple of extra holes in his body. The main task was accomplished. However, it was too early to relax. The enemy was strong and had not yet been defeated. Naruto looked expectantly at the commander. She needed instructions, preferably immediately. However, it seemed that the commander had no time for that now. The girl watched with admiration as both opponents quickly put together dozens of different preparing, definitely, a very powerful technique. How their techniques clashed and how Kakashi-sensei seemed to predict all the actions of his opponent, repeating after him without any delays. Powerful jutsu flew one after another, and then, when it seemed that their opponent was finally weakened so much that everything could be finished with one decisive blow, he appeared. An unremarkable long-haired ninja, wearing a mask similar to the masks of Konoha Anbu, who introduced himself as an Anbu of the Mist, knocked out and later took the dead body of a missing nin from his village. However, Naruto was tormented by vague doubts. No, she knew that Anbu could become ninja of any age, there were no questions about that, but the girl was almost certain that the missing nin was not dead. And, as far as she knew, Anbu had no need to take the corpses of missing nin, but she could be mistaken, and since the commander did not say anything, everything was fine. However, perhaps she was hasty. As soon as she thought that everything went as it should, Kakashi-sensei lost consciousness. This was definitely not a good sign. At least the customers said that his house was not far away. Part 9. A little about rivalry and training. The only bad news, as it turned out upon arrival, was the commander's bed rest, which promised to last a week, and later as Naruto thought the survival of Zabuza. Kakashi-sensei explained perfectly how he survived and why, however, without answering the girl's unasked question. What to do about it? Because the next battle could turn out to be far from in their favor, especially if you remember that in the future there may be more than one nuke nin. However, her thoughts were interrupted by a pessimistic boy named Inari. He began to assure everyone that they would certainly die soon. Naruto had no reason to disagree with him. The situation was still bad, but considering how such statements lowered the overall morale, and therefore the fighting spirit of the team, it was necessary to object. There would be something else to object to. Gato is not a significant problem for us. If the situation requires it, we will get rid of him. Naruto didn't like speaking on behalf of the group, especially considering that the commander was present during the conversation and was in good health. However, the boy would hardly agree with the statements of adults, even if those adults were ninja. The calm tone slightly dampened the child's ardor, but he apparently wasn't going to give up his point of view so easily, so he simply ran out of the room. Let's say that was not Naruto's main problem now. It was much more important to decide what to do with the aforementioned Gato, the obviously living Zabuza, that mysterious ninja who pretended to be NBU, as well as with the strange looks of his teammates. More precisely, with Sakura's strange look. The Uchiha seemed to understand what Naruto meant. However, Uzumaki did not have to explain to Haruno what a ninja's job was, and how future missions could shake her beliefs. However, the girl did not know that the future would shake not only Haruno's beliefs, but hers as well. Naruto turned her gaze to the commander. She needed a plan for the immediate actions. Even though Zabuza is alive, we won't see him for the next week, so we have some time to raise your overall skill level. Upon arriving in the forest, located not far from the customer's house, Kakashi-sensei launched into an explanation of how to properly use chakra. Naruto was really interested in listening, even though she already knew all this perfectly well, but she was outraged that the commander believed that she was not using the techniques correctly. She, who had spent several years honing her control and perception, training to the limits of her capabilities. It was even more offensive after that to hear the task and the goal of the training, to climb a tree without hands. Sensei, does he seriously believe that she can't do it? She started learning it right after they told them about the clones. Despite all her efforts, she couldn't do it, so Naruto turned to her old friends, books that directly said that she lacked chakra control. So she started looking for exercises that could improve it. And she found them. The simplest and most important were exercises for walking on trees and water. Oh, and how many times she fell, knocking her elbows, knees, breaking her tailbone and getting bruises on her back, and how many times she was forced to swim because she didn't have enough control to walk on water. One way or another, 2 years before Naruto's graduation she already knew how to do it, and now the commander tells her to learn it. As if demonstrating her disagreement with Naruto's assignment, she synchronously placed her foot on a nearby tree with Kakashi-sensei, and, synchronously with him, walked to the very top. 10 minutes later, Sakura settled down on a nearby tree, leaving the only guy in the lurch, after which the sensei had to urgently come up with a new task for the two of them. However, Naruto immediately said that she did not need another task. Since she had some free time, it would be worth practicing the technique given to her by the third. As she was leaving, the girl heard the sensei praising Sakura's control, saying that with such indicators she could try herself in Iri ninjutsu, acting as a medic in the squad. The girl no longer heard how the conversation ended. She diligently recalled everything that was in the scroll. Make the seals again, pour in some chakra and nothing. Naruto was starting to get tired of the failures. The girl was sure she was doing everything right. The set of seals was correct. The chakra was used exactly as much as needed, but something wasn't working. However, Uzumaki is no stranger to failure. Usually she spends several weeks, if not months, learning something new, and this is only the third day. However, she can't lag behind Uchiha. He has already reached more than half of the tree, which means she has less and less time. Naruto didn't quite understand why she wanted to master the technique by the time Sasuke finished his tree-walking training. She just needed it. Try pouring in twice as much chakra. An unfamiliar voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts, causing her to instinctively turn around and throw a kunai in the direction she thought it came from. The charming girl? She easily dodged it, which only made Uzumaki more wary. And she felt somehow familiar. However, she didn't show any hostility. She even tried to help, so throwing shuriken was unnecessary. You never know, maybe she'll turn out to be an ally of Konoha. I beg forgiveness. Part 10. Battle on the Bridge. The new technique ultimately squeezed every conceivable and inconceivable juice out of Naruto, leaving her exhausted and falling off her feet from psychological fatigue. This, perhaps, was the main drawback of the technique, or perhaps the drawback of Naruto herself? The technique, allowing one to create a literally identical copy of oneself, was very exhausting for the brain, since another Naruto was not a simple clone with a consciousness identical to Naruto's. No, the clone created by this technique literally created a separate mind for itself, as if Naruto suddenly had another consciousness. It was a little disturbing. So it was not surprising that even after returning early and going to bed earlier than everyone else, she still overslept. However, surprising or not, it was still not a joy. Nor was she happy about the deadly fatigue that showed no signs of going away. Because of it, Naruto was losing a significant portion of her speed, which was not at all a joy in a state of heightened combat readiness. Still, learning a new technique should have been postponed until a calmer time. But now was not the time. After quickly tidying herself up, Naruto hurried towards the bridge, following the direct instructions left to her by her commander. She was a little put off by the obvious sword marks on the trees, but directly contradicting an order? No thanks. The bridge was not that far from their employer's house, so it didn't take the girl long to get there. Already on the outskirts, her heart suddenly sank, but then it let go, so she didn't pay attention to it, hurrying to join the fight that had already begun. Unfortunately, that same Anbu from the hidden fog managed to complete his strange technique before she managed to intervene, and although she arrived almost immediately, knocking him out of his technique, Sasuke still managed to get many, albeit minor, injuries. That guy Haku was very fast when he immersed himself in the mirrors he created. It's a pity Naruto didn't have time to stop and think it all over. However, she's not at the academy anymore. It's time to get used to thinking on the go. Either way, it looks like the technique that Uchiha was trapped inside was a Kekkei Genkai, which complicated the matter considerably. At the very least, Naruto didn't have any techniques in his arsenal that could counter anything or, what would have been much better, destroy the mirrors. In principle, she only had the general techniques from school and a new, unstable and dangerous one, capable of putting her out of action, the Hell Double technique, which it would have been better not to use for now. Well, the situation was clearly not in their favor. Staying outside Naruto could do little to help, however, inside she would also be of little help. Leave this fight to Sasuke and help the commander, whose order would be very useful now. But there she would also be more of a hindrance than a help. Sakura did not need help at all. Naruto felt uneasy, frozen between two battlefields and not knowing what to do with herself. On one side, Sasuke was fighting, now surpassing her in speed and still not keeping up with his opponent. On the other, Kakashi-sensei was fighting a relatively even battle. Somewhere to the side, Sakura was defending the customer. And Naruto? What should she do? In general, it would be more logical to help Sasuke, since he was clearly inferior to his opponent. But how? Naruto doesn't have any cool techniques yet. She's a monster girl who recently graduated from the academy. She doesn't have and never had a clan capable of teaching her any secret technique. The only thing she has is a technique that is very dangerous for her, and even that is useless in this situation, and good basic shinobi skills. But that's all. How could she help Sasuke with such a meager set of skills? What could she oppose to the enemy? Nothing. And the cry of the last Uchiha completely proved her uselessness. Her comrade, the one whose life her commander had ordered to be put above even the duty of a shinobi, was now falling on the surface of the never-completed bridge, pierced by hundreds of needles, and the flame of his chakra was rapidly fading. He was dying. But he was her comrade, her friend. How could he die? Die because of her? Because she was so helpless? Weak? Because she was afraid? What was she afraid of? Dying? Or trusting? The whole world around her seemed to freeze, narrow, focused on just one falling body. The body of her friend? Enemy? Rival? Comrade. On the body of her comrade. Because of her weakness, her helplessness, her slowness, her indecisiveness, because of her comrade suffered. She failed, she violated the silent order of her commander. She put her life above the life of her comrade. Was it right? Did it matter? Did it make sense? What should she have done? None of that mattered now. Uchiha, whoever he was to her, was dying. Dying because of her. She couldn't leave it like that. Suddenly, the world felt different. Everything became much clearer and seemed to slow down. There was more chakra, all senses became more acute. Naruto, with the edge of her barely retained consciousness, became aware of the lengthening of her nails. Or rather, claws? However, it did not matter. It didn't matter that she seemed to have somehow gained the fox's abilities, nor all these external and internal changes, nor the thirst for blood that enveloped her from head to toe. What mattered was the enemy Haku and his that and the dormant technique, inside which her man was dying, bleeding out. What mattered was the chakra, poisonous, poisoned by pain and hatred, chakra capable of penetrating this technique of cursed mirrors. Naruto tensed up, and then the whole world drowned in scarlet. She didn't care about her humanity, she wasn't a person, she was a weapon. She didn't care about the cruelty, the shinobi world was cruel. She didn't even care that some of her desires, some of her actions weren't hers at all. In the end, she completely agreed with them. She didn't listen to what the enemy was telling her, she didn't follow her own fight or the commander's. She didn't live, she didn't breathe, she didn't exist. She just hated. This hatred had always been with her, it had long ago merged with her, absorbed it, became a part of her, just as hatred itself had become a part of Naruto. They were one. Always. Without a second thought, Naruto PRB the enemy's chest. PRB flesh, crushed bones, tore the heart. Not a single muscle twitched on the face, covered by a mask. Naruto hates. Naruto does not forgive. Naruto does not love. But Naruto knows how to care. Even in a peculiar form, not really understanding what care is, but he cares. And therefore Naruto not forgives. A second later, the commander, whose fight Uzumaki had not even remembered until that moment, similarly pierced the chest of his enemy, which marked the end of the fight. Or at least that's what they wanted to believe, but their perception, which had not yet returned to normal, was heightened to the limit, and told them that a huge number of small, almost civilian, chakra lights were approaching them. They wanted to believe that these were bridge builders, but the disgusting voice of the strange old man, Gato, as the customer called him, destroyed the already weak hope. The situation was not the best. There were more than 100 opponents, 3 of them. They had a customer and an incapacitated Sasuke who needed to be protected. The commander's chakra was almost at 0, and Naruto herself was staying sane by sheer willpower. The hostage was also a problem, the customer's daughter, whose name had completely slipped the girl's mind. Yes, it was not an easy task. But Uzumaki had dealt with worse. Sighing heavily, Naruto began to fold seals in a hurry. It seemed that she still couldn't do without a new technique. The girl desperately didn't want to use a technique that she hadn't fully mastered yet, at such an important moment, and in such a state, but they didn't really have a choice. The enemy was saying something, it seemed he was mocking and demanding, the commander was thinking about something, but he did not stop her. Did he agree with the plan? And did it matter now? She could not allow any more of her comrades to suffer. They, both Uzumaki, both Naruto, acted in sync, rushing through the enemy lines like a hurricane, sweeping away everything in its path. In them, in each of them, hatred was still boiling, multiplied by the awareness of their helplessness and the feeling of guilt, slowly spreading through all their limbs. After all, she saw traces of swords in the forest, saw a dead boar. She even then realized that someone went to the customer's home and understood that a woman and a child would hardly be able to fight off even such insignificant enemies. The situation with the hostage was entirely her fault. And it didn't matter that the order was to immediately arrive at the bridge, it didn't matter that the commander should have thought of this first. She didn't think of it, she didn't do it. However, her self-digging did not help the enemies in any way. So after a few minutes the hostage, all tearful and shaking, was entrusted to her own father, and the bridge was covered with corpses. Naruto was ready to thank God that they were just mercenaries, and they had defeated all the ninja before, because in any other case she would never have won. Neither alone, nor with the support of the team. However, the girl did not believe in God, and she had no strength left to think at all, so, having reached the commander with difficulty, she hurried to follow the example of her own enemies, fall into a horizontal position and pretend to be a corpse. Fortunately, unlike the mercenaries, they will only pretend. Part 11. First Doubts. As it turned out, the hostage situation had another unpleasant consequence. Unpleasant, to put it mildly. As soon as Naruto came to his senses, she was hit with the news of the boy's death Inari at the hands and swords of those mercenaries who were sent after the hostage. It was another blow to the gut. She not only failed, she frankly failed. The hostage was captured, the child was dead, and she, who could have prevented all this, ignored all the signs because the order, obviously, was above speculation. And even having carried out the order, she was still useless. Sasuke was wounded, and she herself turned out to be useful only by plunging into hatred. What is that if not a failure? What was she even like? Just a few days ago, she would have confidently said that she was the village's weapon, a shinobi, a member of Team 7, and the commander's subordinate. But now, did she want to be a weapon? A shinobi? Did she need a team? And the commander? Is it normal to have your own desires? Should you give them up? Maybe it's easier to give up the village? Since the village gave up on her at birth. Naruto definitely needs to sit down and rethink a lot of things. After all, she has been living with the idea of getting rid of emotions, desires, and her own will for many years. But is it right? Is it worth it? And most importantly, for whom are these sacrifices? She is no longer a child, she is no longer afraid. She is a shinobi, she is no longer afraid of civilians, their attitude does not touch her, so why such concessions, sacrifices? What and to whom is she trying to prove? Maybe it's worth changing the goal? The way of thinking? The priorities? But is it worth it? It was all too difficult. One way or another, the bridge was almost finished, Gato was gone, which meant they would soon be returning to the village. Naruto didn't know how to feel about it. It seemed like the mission was accomplished, albeit not perfectly, but they were a team of genin, and no one would have sent them on such a mission if the village had known how difficult it really was. But still, at least for herself, she couldn't call this mission accomplished. It was a failure. Yes, she had just graduated from the academy, yes, she was not an experienced shinobi, but she still had to be better, smarter, more thoughtful. She had to do more, be everywhere, foresee everything. But instead, she made so many mistakes. Because of her, Sasuke almost died, Inari died, the customer's daughter was taken hostage, she unleashed her hatred, she didn't follow the commander's silent order to protect her teammates. For the first time, Naruto was not happy that she fully fit the meaning of the word, shinobi. If all these mistakes are part of the shinobi path, then does she need this path? And even though the commander, no, Kakashi-sensei, tried to convince her that she was not to blame for anything and could not foresee everything, that Sasuke suffered not because of her fault, and that it was he who should have foreseen all this in the first place, it did not make it any easier. It seemed to Naruto that everyone was so lenient towards her only because the Uchiha had ultimately survived. If he had died, it would have immediately become clear how bad Naruto was. She had failed. She was unacceptably weak. She needed to become stronger. As strong as possible. As soon as the bridge was completed and Uzumaki and Uchiha were once again firmly on their feet, their team set out for the village. Naruto didn't know whether to be happy or sad about it. After that ill-fated mission, they had returned to D-rank missions again, which, in contrast to the only C-rank mission, was even good, but in the long run. However, due to the simplicity and monotony of the tasks given, the girl had a lot of free time, which she happily spent on endless training. In the end, the mission to Nami no Kuni clearly showed how weak she still was. So Uzumaki immediately upon returning to the village buried herself in books, trying to find there almost a panacea. Naturally, there was no solution to all the problems in the books, but the girl was not upset. She carefully selected everything that could be useful to her in her time as a shinobi, from simple practices with chakra to books with low-ranking elemental jutsu. Fortunately, with the rank of genin, she finally got access to the shinobi library. Endless hours behind the bookcases, interrupted only by tasks and short sleep, even awakened a feeling of nostalgia in Naruto. She recalled with a sad smile how she had hidden in another, similar library since early childhood, how she had escaped from the harsh reality into the world of books. It was a pity that now she could no longer do the same. However, now there was another reason for going to the library. If earlier Uzumaki tried to find an outlet in books, tried to hide from the aggressive reality, now she needed books to fight back against this reality. To prove, first of all to herself, that she was not as weak as that ill-fated mission had shown. Of course, books alone were not enough for this, but she was always ready to work. After all, who, if not Naruto, knew what hard work on the verge of exhaustion was? Who, if not Naruto, spent all possible time in training since childhood, desperately trying to catch up and overtake all these clan children? Who, if not Naruto, was able to find something important and interesting even in the most useless and ordinary books, something that would certainly be useful to her in the future? So the girl stocked up on patience, with difficulty got hold of chakra-conducting paper and buried herself in books. The result of the test with the paper, by the way, although unexpectedly pleasant, still did not please Uzumaki, Futon, and Raiton. On the one hand, it is a sin to complain after all, two elements at once, but on the other, Futon and Raiton do not interact with each other in any way, which reduces the number of possible combinations to a minimum. But in fact, this is not such a problem. After all, in order to learn another element, you do not need to be predisposed to it. Even if due to the lack of this very predisposition, it will be more difficult to learn, but Naruto is no stranger to it. The only question is, what element should I choose as an auxiliary one? Definitely not Doton. It is too difficult to connect with Raiton, and it interacts with Futon in SOSO ways. But then what? Katon? Again, it does not interact much with Raiton, but it combines perfectly with Futon. Although there is also the Suiton variant, which combines well with Raiton. Fire or water? A question worth pondering. However, before pondering the third element, it is worth studying the first two first. So, weeks flew by with training, missions, and books. Although it was not visible from the outside, Naruto worked almost to the point of exhaustion, sometimes without sleeping for several days in a row, honing everything that was available to her, from taijutsu and chakra control to ninjutsu, both new ones like air bullets and old ones, like practicing with the double. The girl also did not forget about general knowledge, necessary not only for shinobi. After all, you never know what awaits you on a mission. And if you have to work undercover? A separate point was the combination of various techniques, such as joint taijutsu with a double, crossfire from air bullets with it, or combining taijutsu with Raiton. With the element of lightning, things were generally interesting. Naruto did not find a single technique that would be within her power now, but she discovered an interesting detail due to the pure transformation of chakra. One can significantly accelerate physically. However, this feature had one significant drawback: Naruto simply could not keep up with her own speed. She did not have a dojutsu that would allow her to react to everything that was happening around her at the speed that her body could develop. Simply put, Naruto's vision and reflexes did not keep up with her movements, and part of the training was aimed primarily at closing this shortcoming. This entire course of a young fighter, authored by a young fighter, incredibly exhausted the girl, although it bore fruit. Fuel was also added to the fire by the feeling of racing against time. Uzumaki constantly felt like she was not keeping up, that she was wasting time in vain, and that at the decisive moment she would still lack skills. Considering that the time for the Chunin was approaching, Shikina Naruto believed that she was not even that far from the truth. After all, they were a pretty strong team and had already completed a sufficient number of low-level missions so that their sensei could well recommend them for this exam, sincerely believing if not that they would pass it, then at least that they would be able to gain valuable experience. In the end, it would be important for them to even just feel the tension that reigns during the exam, feel the overall level of strength of the candidates for the title of Chunin, as well as understand the intricacies of the relationships between the hidden villages. However, despite all this, thoughts about the Chunin exams did not visit the girl very often. She did not have time for it. In general, she did not have much time for anything other than assignments, sleep, and training. Although this did not mean that she missed the sharp increase in the number of foreign shinobi in the village, or the unnecessarily early departure of the sensei. But even that wasn't a reason to skip the scheduled training, especially considering the extra time that had appeared. And Sakura, who had argued about something with Uchiha and was angry because of it, had nothing to do with it, definitely not. Sakura. In fact, Naruto sometimes forgot that their team consisted of 4 people, not 3. Of course, not when they were on another boring mission. No matter how Haruno presented herself to everyone, she still liked to whine. What Naruto didn't like about Sensei was his punctuality. Or, more accurately, his complete lack thereof. And it would be fine if it was a delay of 10 or 15 minutes, or even half an hour, but seriously? 2 hours? She could have spent that time much more usefully. At least she had brought a book with her. Having killed time with a frankly boring theory of chakra transformation into elements, which, as it seemed to Naruto, was also not accurate, they finally waited for their lost teacher, only for him to hand them permission to participate in the exam and send them home. Uzumaki probably never felt more indignation towards her superior in her entire life. And for this she spent 2 hours of her time on a pointless wait? He could have just as easily sent them these permissions by mail, and that would have been more useful. But even so, the indignation quickly gave way to anticipation. The Chunin exam awaits her, her first real chance to prove herself. An exam where she can prove to everyone, including herself, that you don't need to have a clan behind you to achieve something. An exam where everything will be serious, but where the opponents will be about her level, and not like on that ill-fated mission. Chunin awaits her. Shuriken. Part 12. Chunin Shuriken. Chunin Examination. The Chunin Exam. An exciting event in the life of any shinobi, especially if you are participating in it for the first time. For Team 7, this was exactly such an exam. Naruto was not yet ready to admit it, but in fact, she was in anticipation. A new rank is no longer a joke, which means the tasks promise to be interesting. With various subtexts, definitely increased difficulty, and most importantly with strong opponents, be they examiners or candidates from other villages. Every time Naruto thought about all this, to her disappointment, she shuddered excitedly. She had not been so interested in anything other than training for a long time. However, one should not forget that the rank of Chunin is also a great responsibility. Only the best of the best will receive the rank. And she will definitely be among them. Although, of course, to begin with, their team should at least get to the venue. The task is the simplest, but even here the examiners could not help but spoil the lives of the genin. In one of the corridors on the way to the goal, there was a fake office neatly covered with genjutsu. Of course, for their team, it was not particularly difficult to figure this out after all. They were not for nothing one of the most promising teams of their graduating class. However, this could be said about half of the teams of their graduating class. But that wasn't the end of the surprises on the way to the right office. First, they were accosted by a guy who claimed to be head over heels in love with Sakura, who in a short taijutsu duel knocked out Uchiha, who, mind you, was one of the best in their class, and then it turned out that their sensei had arranged a separate test of Sakura's fighting spirit, and in fact they could have failed even before the exam began. Yeah, that would have been a shame. But Sakura didn't chicken out, and even earned herself a couple of bonus points in Naruto's eyes, slowly but surely rising from the line of appendage to the line of sort of teammate. True, Naruto immediately regretted this, as soon as Haruno started a terribly loud argument with Yamanaka Ino, whose team was also recommended for the exam. Why can't these girls ever be a little quieter? Uzumaki even felt sorry for Sasuke for a moment, next to whom these two beasts, and there's no other way to say it, had their argument. The girl herself intentionally stood a little to the side, so that the random glances that their potential enemies kept throwing at the source of the noise would bypass her, or at worst only touch her tangentially. She didn't need any extra attention right now. It was already uncomfortable enough. There were more than 100 shinobi in the room, which was unnerving in itself, and some of them were also emitting a noticeable thirst for blood. Not least because of her suspiciousness and the unpleasant sensations of being in Naruto's neighborhood, she was the first to notice the newly graduated Chunin candidates guy approaching their group. He had blonde white hair, strange round glasses, and for some inexplicable reason offered them information about the other participants. Just like that. Uzumaki, of course, was not under any illusions. She really was a little paranoid, but something like that would not seem suspicious only to civilians, and even then it was not a fact. In general, the girl was in no hurry to believe the information that they were providing, but she still did not refuse one. She really wanted to know about the Hyuga she had recently met. It might have been a bit reckless, Naruto was fully aware of that, but Uchiha had still gone ahead of her, so if they were going to leave them in debt, then nothing depended on her actions, and if the information on the cards was incorrect or inaccurate, well, as a Chunin candidate, she should get used to such things. Although the girl was of course interested in where this Kabuto got information on the newcomers, of which there should clearly be quite a few here, take at least the guy Sasuke was asking about. Judging by his appearance, he was their age, so there was a 90% chance that he was taking the exam for the first time, but the guy taking the exam not for the first time also had information on him. Something definitely didn't add up here. Fortunately, this farce, proudly called information exchange, did not last long. First, they were kindly interrupted by the shinobi of sound, and a couple of minutes later by the examiner. He looked impressive, all in scars, obviously from torture. He towered over even the tallest candidates, and was clearly around 2 meters tall. The positive impression was not helped by the threatening look from under his brows, which did not promise anything good. If you add to all this the aura of horror, actively released along the entire perimeter of the office, then it created a completely realistic feeling that you were in an interrogation or torture chamber, and clearly not from the side of the interrogator. However, Naruto's aura had long since become intimidating, as well as the stern faces of adults. She had seen too many of those faces, had been afraid too often. Fear was a superfluous emotion, a shinobi didn't need it. It prevented rational thinking, weakened you, made you incapable of combat. Uzumaki had long ago destroyed this disgusting feeling in herself. In general, the rules of the first stage of the exam, which they had to explain as soon as they sat down, were quite simple. There is a test of 10 questions. The 10th question will be asked 15 minutes before the end of the time. There is a point system, common for the team. Points are awarded for correct answers. Points are deducted for incorrect ones. Cheating is not allowed if you are caught cheating. Points are deducted from you. If you are caught 3 times, you are disqualified. In general, nothing complicated, a simple test for obtaining information. Only Naruto did not need it. The girl herself knew the answers to all these questions and was ready to swear that Haruno knew them too. There was Uchiha left, but he has a Sharingan, he can handle it. Now one of them was good at obtaining information on such a written exam. The only unknown variable was the 10th question, which, as luck would have it, was still 10 minutes away when the girl finished with all the questions known at the moment. There was absolutely nothing to do, so the girl began to look around unnoticed, trying to notice how others were getting information, while carefully closing her own sheet. She really didn't want to serve as a source of information for anyone. It was enough that, it seemed, Sakura had fallen under the influence of the Yamanaka clan's technique. However, Uzumaki herself was not insured against such a thing, so she could not blame her teammate for such a thing. And there was a lot to look at around. There were mirrors, and sand, and the famous Byakugan, and the already familiar Naruto. Sharingan performed by Uchiha, and it seems, even the shadow technique of the Nara clan. In general, there was complete madness going on around, and the examiners did not even try to stop it, seating only those who acted completely clumsily. By the time the last question was to be announced, the girl's eyes were already dazzled from constantly tracking other people's attempts to cheat, so she was incredibly happy, impatiently awaiting the end of the first stage. Of course, the number of remaining participants was a little upsetting, but nothing they could handle worse. However, as soon as the examiner began to explain the special rules of the 10th question, Uzumaki immediately realized why there were so few people who dropped out. It seemed that the main part should have dropped out not on the first 9 questions, but on the last one, the 10th. Of course, Naruto was confident in their team they would be able to answer the last question, no matter what it was. But the members of the other teams were not so confident, en masse getting up from their seats and leaving the hall. At that moment, when about a third of the original number of participants remained in the hall, people finally stopped leaving the room, and then the examiner suddenly announced that everyone who remained passed. Part 13. Forest of Death, Preparations. The second stage was supposed to be as sudden as its examiner. If only he wasn't as wild and unpredictable. The first appearance Anko-san was truly memorable, for lack of a better word. I wonder if the examiners were chosen this way on purpose or if it just happened that way. But what does it matter? This time, after a simple and short first stage, they had to live in the famous Forest of Death for at least a couple of days. 5 at most after that, they would be automatically disqualified and most likely found and taken out. In the best case scenario, they also had to fight with other teams that had passed the first stage for special scrolls, since they would only be given one, and to pass the stage, a pair of different scrolls was needed. Which also complicates the tasks, because it was necessary to find out which team had which scroll, since several identical scrolls are of little use. At most, they would help in negotiations, if such negotiations took place at all. In general, the rules of the second stage were extremely simple, but at the same time they provided a huge scope for various machinations and dirty play. From convincing opponents of the necessity of opening any of the scrolls, to the deliberate destruction of one of the enemy team members. Or even all at once. In the end, if at least one of the team members does not reach the tower, or is unable to continue the exam. In general, the rules were extremely simple and extremely flexible. They only had to choose how exactly they would use this flexibility. A good shinobi should be able to squeeze the maximum out of the minimum provided, and if the maximum is provided. The forest itself was surprisingly light, despite the dense crowns of numerous giant trees. The branches and roots would be excellent for hiding. Perhaps they should find a safe shelter for the first time. Most likely the first day will be very busy. Should we take shelter? Many will try to finish off the scrolls in one fell swoop. Naruto casually pointed at the high treetops. Yes, they would be a little more noticeable at the heights, weaks in the lowlands, but if they managed to climb high enough, well, people instinctively do not look up. This could play into their hands, especially since Uzumaki did not trust the local land. And she had every reason. A strange lilac fog was slowly but inexorably clinging to their feet. Of course, there was no guarantee that it would be better at the top, but it was worth a try. This forest is dangerous in itself, not for nothing it has such a terrifying name. Makes sense. Sasuke responded shortly, already looking for the shortest route up. They could just go up, but considering they were trying to stay as inconspicuous as possible, not the best plan. Sakura nodded silently. Lately it seemed to her even if she did not agree with the reasoning of her teammates, they would still do it. At the very least because they were the majority, at the most because she had no convincing arguments against. She had nothing at all, no arguments, no strength, no convictions. Haruno was not even sure why she was taking this exam. It was obvious that, at least morally, she was completely unprepared for it. She would simply drag her teammates down. It was good that at least not literally. It didn't take them long to get almost to the treetops, and they spent only a little time finding a suitable place to hide in inconspicuous hollow, surrounded by many intertwining branches. Having set up traps and made sure that there really was no one in the immediate vicinity, Team Number 7 gathered to discuss the upcoming stage. Should we develop a password? Maybe a gesture or a word? Will we act soon, or wait until the third or fourth day? Should we reduce the number of participants, or prefer to secretly get the scroll and finish quickly? Each of them had good questions that required decisions, and each of them was not shy about asking them, albeit for different reasons. If Sakura tried to show a painful initiative, wanting to close her metaphorical uselessness with this, the same Sasuke wanted to just end everything as quickly as possible. But since this was a team stage, he was forced to coordinate his actions. After all, if one of the girls did not reach the tower, he would also be automatically disqualified. Naruto, on the other hand, was looking more forward. The third and final stage would most likely be a spectacle. After all, it's not for nothing that rumors about the Chunin exam are circulating even among the civilian population. And what is more spectacular than fights? So it would be quite logical to get rid of potential future competitors right now, especially since at least half of them are not even part of the Hidden Leaf. 2 targets with 1 kunai. Almost an ideal layout. Needless to say, their opinions were a little divided. Where Sakura flatly refused to get rid of opponents, Sasuke also considered the idea with a password stupid and inappropriate, noting that after the first use in the presence of an enemy, the password will become useless and a new one will be needed. Naruto was also very persistent in her desire to wait out the first day without engaging in battle. At least so that more teams with a full set of scrolls would appear. Why attack teams with 1 scroll, having a 50% chance that the opponents have the same scroll as you, if you can attack a team that already has both scrolls, which guarantees that you will get what you need? In the end, they still developed a rough plan of action. They would begin a leisurely movement towards the tower and try not to stick their heads out unnecessarily for the next 6 to 8 hours, then begin a full-fledged hunt for the scroll, try to get it as quickly as possible, and then head straight for the tower without unnecessary delays, depriving any teams they encountered of scrolls along the way. In this way, they would not get rid of opponents, but would also significantly reduce the number of possible opponents. There was a strictly regulated number of scrolls. And that was where they parted ways. Ahead of them lay 2 long and painful days, but each of them was determined to bring the plan to life at any cost.